Hey guys, hope everyone is doing amazing tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we're on edition 9 or 10 now of these roundtable talks, and it's going really well, I would say. So, hearing lots of good feedback. Everyone seems to love it. So, it's been great. Haven't seen you guys or really talked to you guys since the Homestead conference. That was so much fun and a great time, and I picked up a few things too as well from that. Did you guys learn anything new or got some new tricks, hints, tips, that kind of thing?
I think so. I'm trying to think of what specifics. I think it was a lot of information and assimilation of information from others and ideas from others that are doing things. And yeah, I think it was really good.
Yeah, I learned how much the community was tight. I didn't think it was that big. When we got there were people that knew us. There were people who wanted to talk to us, interact with us. And just when I saw everyone, I arrived at Darren's place. It was like I've known him forever. And then same thing when I saw Mike and when I saw Chris. It's like we've known each other forever. It was so much fun.
Yeah, I picked up a few tips and things. Learned a little bit about bees. Set in on that one, and I learned a lot about it takes a lot to feed a person. that was a really well planned out speech you gave there. It was good. So, but yeah, no, it was great. It was amazing to meet everybody. It's like we've been friends for years and years. Um, yeah, it was great.
Yeah, that was. We definitely got to do it again, and definitely got to hook up elsewhere too. You know, a little more of these community events would be
Mhm.
awesome. So
Mm.
I think the
Absolutely.
big problem will be everyone's time, getting the time to do it, and getting away from the homestead and that sort of thing. So,
It'll have to be timed perfectly to avoid periods when there's a lot to do.
oh,
There's
exactly.
always a lot to do.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I think right at the beginning of spring was nice because there's not as much happening. Where you know next year for us it'll probably be calves coming from the cows and that kind of thing. But this year was pretty good. Fall I think is hard because of the not only harvesting vegetables but canning and
Hunting.
harvesting animals as well, that kind of thing. So
No, absolutely.
yeah. So if anyone wasn't aware, we had a big storm that went through Ontario, Quebec. It was pretty crazy. I think almost everyone we've talked to had some damage or some sort of issues and that kind of thing. How were you guys affected by the storm?
Who wants to go first? I wasn't affected at all, so you guys go ahead.
Well, we actually got some footage of it while we were standing in the door frame of the barn while it was going on, and we were standing there because it was the safest place to be. Like if perhaps trees fell down and crushed the barn, we would have been trapped in the trailer. So the safest place to be was right there in the door frame because there wasn't a whole lot of debris coming through. Um, but yeah, our place was just wrecked. There are power lines down everywhere. There's a state of emergency been called for the township. Um, yeah, it made the lot of work that we had to do that much more. So it's just been crazy lately. I had a bunch of big trees come down. Um, there was this one pine at the beginning of my driveway, which is why I chose my driveway to be where it is. It was probably 3.5, 4 foot wide, and it came down. But luckily, nothing, thank God, nothing got really damaged bad. So I can still move forward. It's just I've been cutting and splitting and clearing and trying to clean everything up for the last 3 or 4 days.
Well, there's a bright side to it, I suppose, for you. From your video, some of the trees, at least you wanted to take them down anyways, so just sped up the urgency of doing it, I suppose.
It was wicked crazy because all the trees that were like close to the house that I was kind of worried about, and I'm like, no, I'll just get the house up, then I'll clear back further. Those all came down, and they came down in such a way that they missed the house. One tree fell and hit like 2 roof panels and dented it. That was it. The other 2 big ones got hung up and just waited for me so that I could go up there and actually drop it right. The satellite dish is mounted on the top of the barn, and it's just setting in a pipe. It's like not screwed down or anything. That should have been a kite flying in the wind. It didn't move at all, but yet it tore treetops off all around it, clearing all my, you know, everything that was getting in the way of signal. So it just like dropped trees and cleared what I needed to do, and I'm like, this is insane. Like it did all this work for me. Yeah, I got a lot of cleanup to do, but.
So what you're really saying is it was potentially helpful.
Oh, very much so. Like, yeah, there's a lot of work I got to do, and I'm without power for like a week and a half. But you know, it did a lot of work. But it expedited a lot of work that I had to do anyway. It's just it went from like down here in the list to way up here. Okay, we got to clean now.
We pretty much lucked out. We did get the tail end of it, but I think it's just our location. Pretty much just came as rain. Now it came as sideways rain, and we had 10 or 20 minutes of wind, but right where we are, nothing came down. Now we only have to drive like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and there's power lines down, there's trees down. So there was damage in the area, but it really seemed to be hit and miss. We didn't seem to get the big part of the cell. So the absolute worst thing that happened to us during it was we had 1 litter of rabbits that got wet, and we actually can't figure out the physics behind it because they were under a tree in behind a little building with the lid on it, and somehow the nest box got soaked and they got cold and they didn't make it, but still can't figure out the physics behind how it happened, given where this rabbit hutch was. But that was really, really kind of it for us. So, knock on wood, we were kind of lucky.
And you didn't have to deal with it at all, eh, Remy?
No, well, we had a little bit of rain, but nothing major. They were announcing that we had to be careful because we might get like tornadoes and stuff like that, but turned out that we got like same as usual for wind, because we always have a lot of wind here. We had a little bit of rain, but when I woke up the next morning, I was expecting to see like floods somewhere down the road, but there was nothing at all. So I guess it passed by between us and Ren's homestead, because I think it hit like a little bit more to the south of the province, but higher to the north from them. So it just passed right between us.
Wow. Yeah, we got a bit of rain here and all that, but nothing that I think we had. No, we didn't even have 1 tree came down. I think that was the cows that knocked it down. So for us, we just had that forest fire that we dealt with. I think it was 2 weeks ago, I want to say, a week ago.
You just had a forest fire.
What's that?
You just had a forest fire to deal with.
Yeah. So it was, I was kind of like, wow, you guys had that kind of little natural disaster, and we had the forest fire, and it was like, trying to think in my head, that's kind of crazy how that happens, and just wondering what everyone's had to deal with after the storms. Is there something specific now you have to do besides, power or that sort of thing?
Well, I know, like, my next phase of the house was trying to get the floor poured, and like the hydro lines are down right across my driveway, so there's no way I can get any trucks in. So that's going to be delayed until they can get the hydro lines fixed and put back. So I don't know when that'll be. So I've just kind of been wandering next door and helping my neighbors with their house build and stuff like that.
And Chris, you didn't have to deal with anything, eh?
Nothing from this one. I mean, it's kind of one of those things. There's always weather events that happen. I'm thinking
Yeah.
back to a prior property. Again, I'm going to knock on wood because we've been fairly fortunate moving here. We're high, so we don't usually have to deal with flooding, and we've got good drainage. But where we used to live, we were actually still relatively high, but there wasn't a lot of soil. So we actually had periods in the spring where you were pretty much in a terrestrial area. It wasn't a wetland or anything like that, but because when we'd get the melt, and we didn't even think of it at the time, it wasn't until we actually put the infrastructure in place, but where we had our chicken coops, they flooded out like 2 springs in a row. The first spring we thought this is bizarre. We, to be honest, couldn't quite figure out what was going on. Just a freak, whatever. But then when the second year it happened, we kind of, it dawned on us, as silly as that sounds, that well, we've got basically no soil here. When the ground's frozen, even though we had sand over top of the rock, it has nowhere to go. So all it does is runs over land, and you didn't know it was happening until you put a building there.
Right.
So that totally changes plans and whatnot. We don't get now, but yeah, little things can be big things. So big things can be even bigger things, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, exactly. Remy, is there anything you've had to do in the past for any storms that you've had to clean up or look after right away before things got really bad?
We had a snowstorm, I think it was last year, where the wind was bad and the snow ended up all over my garage, where like where my chickens are. So for some reason, I don't know, there's just those little tiny holes just to allow the airflow, and the snow got in there, and there was like a feet of snow in my garage. So the chickens were literally walking in the snow. Um, what can I do except for shoveling a little bit? And then even if you do that, there's still gonna be some snow left over. So I didn't do much. I just cleaned the doors, made sure they have a place to be that they could be dry, and they eat snow. So they went through the snow pretty quick. Besides that, didn't really have to do nothing. Like, I mean, it's mostly when it gets wet, I have to take the feed because I usually have the feed on the ground. So I just have to make sure that the feed doesn't touch the ground anymore. That's it.
Yeah, for us, thankfully, we didn't have to do anything after the forest fire. It wasn't no damage at all to us. It just kind of a little scary, that sort of thing. So um, for us, there was nothing to clean up, thankfully. So that was really nice.
How close
Uh,
did that get to you?
about a kilometer and a half.
That's pretty close.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they said if the water bombers weren't there and or it got out of control, Bridget would have had about an hour to pack up and get out. So
And
Yeah,
that's
I heard when the
a
wind
spring
shift.
fire.
Yeah, I heard when the wind shift, those can move real quick.
yeah, it's interesting to see the path because it was basically a straight line. Like it didn't spread this way. It was like a straight line going right for the houses up here. So it just based on the wind. So I've got a video coming out, I think Sunday, that we actually went over to where it burned and did a little tour around the area. So, yeah.
But definitely, all of this makes you think about things that may not, as Mike said, it may not have been at the forefront of your list of things to do or deal with or think about. But even though, for the most part, I'm going to say it, even you, Mike, you've been fortunate. It didn't cause any serious issues. Clean up, but
Hmm.
you
Oh,
avoided a
very
lot of serious
fortunate.
issues. But it still brings up that thought. It's like, well, it's going to, okay, maybe not the exact same thing, but something's going to happen again. It's pretty
Yeah.
much guaranteed that something's going to happen. And then, assessing your property and your surroundings to figure out, well, how do we circumvent things to the best of our.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that's just it. I was going to say, like, what's everyone learned from this? What?
Clear way up, well away from all like buildings and structures. Trees are bad. Trees are bad. I mean, I kind of figured I was gonna have to do that anyway. Like, I just figured it could be back burner, and I would get structures up, and then start doing like landscaping. No, no, yeah, you should do that like right as you're doing everything.
It's kind of scary when you think about it because, like, I mean, I know some people died because of the storm, and it gets you thinking. Like, imagine if you were asleep in your bed and like that came out of nowhere. Nobody was ready for that. It was just supposed to be like normal rain. It just came out of nowhere, and then a tree falls on you while you're sleeping. I mean, that's it. So it didn't happen to me, but it got me thinking that whatever I do in the future, I'm gonna make sure there's no big trees around, like Mike just said, because you don't want that happening when you're sleeping, especially not with kids in the house.
And we had just started talking about moving the trailer out of the barn so we can get more sunlight because it's getting nice out. Can you even imagine? Like, I might have been blown away. Literally blown away. It could
Yeah.
have been so much worse. It was just luck. Grace of God.
Between the wind and trees coming down, it's it's a good thing the trailer you hadn't moved it out yet.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it definitely it depends on the kind of tree too, right? Because windfall for certain trees is a lot more common, especially if they're more shallow rooted than say like things like oak and hickory, for example. You can still have them break. You can still have large branches come off, but they don't tend to be blown over by wind as readily as things like willows and poplars and stuff. So it's also assessing that what's like you say, trees are bad in a way for that particular aspect of them, but at the same time, you could go through and I know this is coming from the other part of my life, but for subdivision builds and whatnot, they do consider that, right? Because you can't build a new house and have windfall, because if you clear an area, even if it's not a disaster, it could just be normal prevailing wind, you increase that chance. But they will sometimes leave things like oaks and hickories because you can pretty much clear all the way around them, and they're generally, I should say that, so well anchored that they don't succumb to it as much.
Well, it just so happens that I chose a grove of poplars as the area to build in because it was the flattest, nicest area. So there's nothing but poplars and pines all around me. I had one maple, but it didn't come down. So yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, we have that problem with the pines here because we're on sand and shallow root, and you get a good wind going, and there's usually some that come down all the time. So we're trying to again create a fire break for the house. Um, as we do that, we'll also be taking out more trees kind of around our fence lines and that kind of thing. Last thing we want is a tree coming down on the fence line overnight and the cows leaving. So that would not be good. So for us, it's cleaning out that kind of stuff. We'll be trying to replace that with fruit trees, nut trees, maple trees, some stuff that's more useful to us. And then you get a few apple trees and all that. You're not going to have the issue with the forest fire like you are with the other stuff. So.
Have you, Darren, planned out sort of, because you mentioned the fire break, and it's not something that I've had to personally create, but I do know some of the, the theory behind it. And have you, just putting you on the spot, but have you thought about how you're going to go about it?
So for us, the first step, we want to take out the trees going back probably like another, I want to say 50 feet at least. One of the things we noticed when we went over and saw where the forest fire was is it easily jumped 40 feet, no problem, between these little islands that were out there. And it was just sand. So, if it's dry enough, you're going to get embers going. So the big thing for us is, take that forest back a bit more, and we want to green that area up. So whether we get uh, more grass growing, more little shrubs, more just plants and vegetations and that kind of stuff growing, and trying to green the area up. We've thought about putting a pond in too to try and get a water source back there as well. You know, just make the whole area more moist. Uh, Once we go further back into the forest, we are planning to put now another cow field. So most of the trees will come out of that, and we'll do that with a lot of grass and pasture, and then start doing some rotational grazing as well. The rest of the forest we're gonna kind of leave right now, but we want to go in, take down some of the taller pines, get them milled, but also a lot of the dead stuff. The forest hasn't been touched in a long time, so you get all those dead pines. You get a lot of that kind of looks like moss and that growing on them too, which is like the perfect tinder for forest fires. So a lot to do there.
That's a good point, because I think that's a bigger picture dilemma too, right? When it's like a lot of other things. Once you start tending, you kind of have to keep it up to a degree, and if
Yeah.
it hasn't been done, it tends to create bigger problems. But then that's where fire is kind of one of those catch-22s, because it's actually really good in some ways, not
Yep.
necessarily for us as individuals, but at a bigger picture, it can be great. But it has that immense damaging quality too. So
And it's funny because I mentioned in that in the video, because it is great for clearing out that dead stuff, getting rid of that dead stuff, generating new growth, new stuff. There's always new things that pop up after a forest fire. The damaging part though is when it affects people's lives. That's that So it's that fine line where, you know, it's good to have them as long as they don't burn too much or destroy people's livelihoods or lives or that sort of thing.
no, exactly.
So with all that's happened with stuff going on, are there plans you guys are making now that you didn't have before? Something that's now a priority that wasn't before?
Well, to me, it's more about the electricity. I build my homestead around freezing stuff, and I realized that it's not really a good idea because we've had power outage in the past when we had the hurricane. I think it was Arthur back in the days where we were without electricity for like 48 hours, which is not too much when you think about it, but it's still enough to lose stuff that you have in your freezer. And then in the peninsula, about 2 hours away from here, they had this big freezing rainstorm, and we're without power for like 3 weeks. So if that happens, you have to keep in mind that you're going to lose the stuff in your freezer. And you can't really start cooking everything because, you got no power. So um, it's time more than ever for me to learn how to can. And I see a lot of people started doing it and started doing it for the first time. So it kind of pushes me to do a little bit more. And this is where I want to go from now on. I want to learn how to can a lot more.
Yeah, for us, it's just, clearing back from the house. We've decided that an area up on the hill where it got a lot of damage, a bunch of trees fell down, we're going to put a garden up there anyway. So we're just trying to bang that out so that she can start growing stuff up there. Um, but it's just expedited a lot for us. Other than that, it's, just clearing around the house, making sure that it's going to be safe. I have to clear around the barn. and make sure that it's safe. But talk about a test for your building. Like, did I build it right? Yeah, it's still standing, so I guess I did okay.
I think it's a big question because there's a lot of different things you could think about for it, right? Because in some ways, it's an extra layer to the whole self-sufficient. Because like Remy said, power, that's a huge thing because that's something that's not if you're hooked up to hydro or whatever utility that you call it in your area, you don't have control over that really. But to get control of that is, I'm going to say, a lot of work, but there's quite an investment there. And I know for us, we're not really at a point that we can do that at the moment. So we already do the canning and whatnot, which is huge, but we don't can everything. Historically, most of the power outages we get are in the winter months, usually freezing rain. So the freezing issue isn't as big of a problem at that point. But and again, knock on wood, we were lucky this time our power didn't go out. But if things like this happen more frequently, it's definitely something to think about. I think our most immediate is probably we do have a couple of large trees that are potential hazards around the house. One of them, I'm not even sure, it's beyond my abilities. It's big. It's an eastern cottonwood and it's big. So I'm not sure about that one. Some of the other ones we can deal with. We'll probably won't deal with them until the winter when we can actually get at them. But then you still have that thing in the back of your mind where it's like, it could happen at any time between now and then. So hopefully it doesn't. But we're fairly lucky on the fire side of things. We have a little bit of fuel in a couple of areas, but generally speaking, we're not in a high risk zone for that. In the greater area we are, but right where we are, not so much. So I say that, and anything can happen, but
Yeah, plans for us. Basically, I already said, the clearing out some more trees almost became like a top priority for us now. We've been every kind of minute we have that's extra, we'll just take some time, take a few trees down. We used to, in the past, when we took the trees down, we'd actually limb everything, cut them off at 8-foot lengths or 12-foot lengths. So then we could have basically posts to use in the future for any more fencing projects like that, or we'd have building supplies that we could mill, that sort of thing. Whereas now, they're coming down and they're going out the back and they go in a pile, and I'll deal with, a shortage of posts or that later. So yeah, that's kind of my thing right now. Wanted to know too, in the emergencies you've dealt with, how have you found the people, the neighbors, people in the community, that sort of thing? What did you have to deal with anyone freaking out, or everyone get along? Everyone was there for each other. Was there anything you expected that didn't happen or weren't expecting?
I know it's been a mixed bag depending on where I live. There was a time when I lived in Michigan and we had a power outage for I think 3-4 days or something, and yeah, it was amazing. The entire block got together. We had big cookouts and everything else. All the food that was going to go bad. But up here, I can't say enough good about my neighbors. Right after the storm rolled through, we ran out to the road, ran down and checked on a neighbor of ours down the way, and then we heard yelling. We turned around. There's our other neighbors checking in on us to make sure we were okay. And then in a matter of like 2 hours, all of the neighbors came out. We had ATVs, chainsaws, tractors, the whole nines, and we're clearing the road, making sure at least one lane was open in case anybody was hurt, so that fire trucks or emergency vehicles could get through. So the community around here has just been amazing. I can't say enough good.
Nice.
I really can't.
I think for me, just thinking back through things, sort of a general statement because I've obviously moved around a little bit from when I was younger to now. Most of the time, I've lived in a fairly rural area, and the one thing I will say, and I think this is a positive. No, not everybody's prepped for absolutely everything that can happen, but I do tend to find uh, there's a little bit more preparation that people in rural areas have for things like this, right? Because chances are the power has gone out for a few days in the past, or those kind of things. Maybe not so much in the real recent history, but definitely historically. So um, I would say it's mostly positive. Usually, I think the biggest one that I've been involved in, and this is going back a long time, was the ice storm of '98. And yeah, neighbors checked in. And I mean, I was a teenager at that point, but neighbors checked in on each other. But at the same time, not everybody was self-sufficient, but they were, for the most part, comfortable enough that they could weather it, for the most part. Which I think helped, right? That's a big thing when you're sort of immediate. When you talk about, there's like layers to community. So your immediate community around you, when everybody's a little bit prepared, that's great because that gives them the time that they could help out, or it just de-escalates everything a little bit.
You know what? You're right because I noticed that up here, where everybody's used to being either off grid or out of power a lot because we're so rural. Um, that everybody's had their generators ready to go. Like there was a lineup for gas, but everybody's just like, yeah, just another day. We've been through this before. The local store, they didn't have to be open. They could have just said, hey, we don't have power due to the storm. Nope, they were up and running on a generator, so everybody could get gas and all sorts of stuff. So, yeah, I can see what you mean. Everybody around here was kind of prepared for that type of an outage because it's kind of a normal thing up here, and it made it easy.
And I remember, and he's talking about the ice storm in '98 in Quebec. I remember even us here in New Brunswick, there was a firefighter had organized something, and there were trucks delivering firewoods. And I remember my dad would bring firewoods there as well. I mean, if everyone chips in a few blocks of wood, fills up a truck pretty quick. And I know there was a lot of trucks, going up there to deliver firewoods, and it's the same thing when it happened in New Brunswick. And that's one of the things that the community seems way bigger when stuff like that happens because everyone from the whole area, from the whole part of Canada, basically was helping. And
Hmm.
that's pretty cool to see. Like, we can't say whatever we want about people in general, but when time comes to help, they do help.
I think that's a good testament to it's kind of it's not a proper saying, but it's like I always think that no matter where we are, no matter our backgrounds, whatever, like most of us are, we want the same things. We want to live happily, etc. And we do want other people to be the same way. So I think it just brings out the worst the worst things that happen often bring out the best qualities in people.
Very true. Very true. It's funny when I can't say much about how people acted because I wasn't here for the fire, but I want to say I think for some, from judging from who I've spoken to and stuff that's happened, I think for some it was a little surreal. They didn't really grasp how bad it could have gotten. Um, I think a lot of people were out with their phones, taking pictures, taking photographs, rather than, when I
Getting
was
ready.
talking to Bridget, I had her pull out the hoses, like turn on all the sprinklers out the back to try and get as much of it wet as possible. Told her to put a ladder going up onto the roof. So if it gets closer, you can throw a sprinkler up on the roof, that sort of thing. So I think for everyone else, I didn't really, I don't know, I wasn't there, but I don't know if they were doing the same things, and if they were, I think in this situation, it's one that, you know, you can't really get together to help out. You gotta just kind of fend for yourself and get out of Dodge if that kind of thing happens. So, uh, after effects, if stuff had happened here, then probably we would have seen more of that community involvement and helping each other out and that sort of thing. So,
I think you bring up a really good point about that too, about it seeming surreal, because the topic tonight kind of is these, I'm going to say, disasters, these events that these events that can be a big deal.
yeah,
And I think most of us and most of the people in the chat, because I've seen it come up a few times, it's like power outages, right?
yeah,
That to people is less surreal, I think, because there's a lot of things that can make that happen. It could be an ice storm, it can be a brownout. Keep listing it. There's a lot of reasons. So
and I think that happens so often,
that
but
people they kind of know how to handle it. Not
yeah,
exactly,
but usually it's like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. It's never that
it's more
prolonged.
familiar. But like fire is a hard one, right? Because like we just said earlier in the live, in a lot of areas, especially built up areas, uh, they don't happen, or they haven't been happening frequently. And
Yeah,
there's a variety of reasons for that, but they now are starting to happen a little more frequently. We've seen that in other parts of Canada and the US and Australia, and we can keep going on the areas that it's happened. And that's a tough one, because it's like you said, once it happens, it comes to the forefront of your mind. But for decades, it really, with a few exceptions, it hasn't been on the forefront of a lot of people's
no,
minds.
no. Just want to take a sec, say hey to Van City Prepper. Thank you for that super sticker. That is awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Good to see you and everyone else here in chat as well. Guys, again, we're with these, we try and, focus on the questions and that, and we'll glance at chat, but a lot of the time, sometimes the chat gets away from us. So we apologize for that. If you have a question, throw it in capitals or put question, and then we'll try and answer it. But thank you so much, Van City. I really appreciate that. That's awesome.
You were just talking about how people react to different scenarios, and there's been a couple times where, like, just power outages alone, if you're in the city, people can kind of go nuts. Like, fist fights at the gas pumps. I know we've all heard about it. I've seen it a couple times, but like, it's like Angie had said earlier. She had seen it back in 03 when there was a big brownout, and she saw people fighting at the at gas pumps and things like that because nobody had power, nobody had any gas. Everybody's just ransacking stores and things, and it can get out of hand quick if if everybody would just lose power for a week, you'd probably see some craziness go on. And so it just reinforces my belief that everybody should kind of have something like this set aside. You should kind of protect yourself and insulate yourself just a little bit. You don't have to go full on and build your bunker and the whole nines, but you should have some sort of a plan in those scenarios. Some place to go, some sort of stockpile to rely on.
Also building up your community and neighbors, making sure you know people, making sure you can rely on each other. You're more likely not to get in a fist fight with your neighbor in a situation if you know them versus
another
if you don't
thing
know
I've
them.
learned is when you're out in the bush like this, if you have in a very rural community, you're only as strong as your neighbors are. So everybody kind of bands together, everybody looks after one another, everybody helps one another. There have been a couple times now where, like when I had surgery on my shoulder, I couldn't plow myself out. My neighbors did it every morning. I never said a word, never had to ask. They're just, they're like family. And it's never been more apparent than when you live this far out in the country.
Nice. So with all of that said, have you guys given any thought to how you would deal with your animals in these events?
Well, I think what you said on one of your Facebook posts there is what I would do. It's the best thing to do. You can't bring all the animals. I mean, we go in the van, we'll take the dog, we'll take, the basics for what we need if something ever comes up that we have to leave. Um, like you have to think that the kids might be hungry, you have to bring food, you have to bring water, you have to bring stuff like that. You might have to bring clothes depending on where you're going. But for the animals, it sucks, but it is what it is. I'm gonna open the doors and hope they can make it. They'll find a place to hide. They'll find a place to run to, or I mean, rabbits run fast. Chickens also. Uh, Pigs will. I don't know what they would do if something ever comes up. I guess they're pretty smart animals. They would find a way. I mean, they used to live in the nature. They used to be wild back in the days before humans took over them. So you just open the doors. You hope for the best. You open the gates. They'll find a way. Same thing happened to Alaskan bush people. I don't know if you watched that show, but they were dealing with wild forest fires, and they released all the animals, and at some point they ended up finding them back because the animals came back to where the food source was, right? So as soon as the fire was out, they came back.
For me, I just kind of fall back on old training. Like I prioritize heavy, so wife, kids, important things like that. After that, I'll try and take care of the animals, but it's sad to say because I'll have to fight my wife from trying to run out and save her plants and the goats and stuff. She's more important, so I make my choices based on the scenario, and I do the best I can. Like if it's a tornado coming through, I'm going to protect me and Ange, and like everything else is secondary. So you always try and do the best you can. I'm not heartless. I love those animals, even though they drive me nuts some days. But no, it's just you have to make those important decisions in that moment, and I don't know. I just always fall back under the training for that.
And the homesteading truth comes out. You admit it. The animals drive you nuts. I think we can all admit that from time to time. Plants not so much, but
During the storm, and I have video proof of it, Angie was going to run out into the storm to save her tomato plants. Not even lying. And I was like, no, you're more important than tomatoes. We can always get more tomatoes. So, yeah, no, I'm fully aware of my situation. I'm fully aware of what my wife's priorities are.
Did the tomatoes make it?
Yeah, they didn't even fly away. Still amazed. Still amazed.
Nice.
They were sitting out on the picnic table, not even hidden anywhere, nothing. Just on the picnic table.
That's wild how that happens.
Trees coming down, tree tops blown completely off. Tomato plants? Safe.
there's advantages to being closer to the ground.
Yeah.
I think for us, to make everything complicated as I tend to do, I think it really depends on the situation because there's a lot of possibilities. One, how much time do you have? There are, like you mentioned, a hurricane, for example, Remy. Now, we don't live in an area that typically, gets the brunt of a hurricane. We may get high winds, we may get a lot of rain, but if you lived in an area where you kind of knew it was coming, as often you do, it's kind of a big weather event, you have some time to prepare. On the flip side, a tornado, you may have no time, no warning for that. So, and the same with the forest fire, you might have some warning or you might not, depending on wind and all the variables that go along with that. So I think it depends. And I actually have a question that comes out of this, but I'll finish answering first. I think the bigger animals, things like horses, cows, sheep, goats, things that can run away, probably in most scenarios, maybe not all, but in most scenarios, if it's really that bad, you are better to just let them out. Especially if they're in a barn or a small pen or paddock, I mean, then they have no way to get away from it. But at least if you can open the gates, and like you said, Mike, it depends. You've got to prioritize. If it's coming so quick that it's split-second decisions of whether you get to safety or you open the gate, I think most of us know what's probably going to happen. But in the storm that just came through, and as I said, we only got a minor brunt of it. We still went back because when you have the electric fence, you don't necessarily want to leave that on in the thunderstorm. It can ruin your equipment, which really is the least of your worries, but it can also kill your animals too, right? Heck, a page wire fence in the wrong scenario, hit by lightning, can kill your animals. So we did have time, I should say. Stephanie had time. She ran back and turned it off because we could see it coming, essentially. So there was that decision that, yeah, we can make that happen. And it wasn't too big of a deal for us. But you might handle a flood differently, a hurricane differently, a tornado differently. They all have their different variables that go along with that, and the speed at which you have to react to it, I think, is a big thing too. But I'll pose a question on that topic, because there are so many different kinds of disastrous events that can happen. Do you think, I'm going to say it this way, in the old days, and I'm going to use this terminology, when things were maybe a little more predictable, i.e., if you lived in Tornado Alley, you kind of expect that. If you live in an area affected by hurricanes, you would expect that. If you live in an area that, received a lot of forest fires or droughts, etc., do you think that some of that stability of living in those areas and expecting certain kinds of events was helpful in some of the planning? Like going back to the fire breaks, if you know you're in a fire zone and you know it's a frequent thing, it probably is a lot easier to rationalize in the back of your mind to put that at the forefront and deal with it, because if you don't deal with it, the results are disastrous. But now that we're getting some events, and I say this loosely, happening in areas where they didn't happen frequently, or at least in our, couple generation memory happen that frequently, do you think that makes it more difficult?
I think people had a better knowledge as well of what to do in those situations. They were used to dealing with events, so I would say there was probably a lot more information on how to deal with that. We were watching one show, and I probably mentioned it before, but it was like 3 people went and they lived in the Victorian era on a farm. And so everything they had to do was like 1880 style, I think, if I got the dates correct. And they actually had this book, and you can actually get it now on Amazon, but it's like, I want to say it was like a farm manual, and it's massive. But this one guy wrote it, and it lists almost everything, that the farmers at that time had to deal with, from diseases to when to plant the crops to, what might happen in floods, or how to prevent floods, or how to build fences, how to, just an entire encyclopedia on life. So I think there was a lot more information and knowledge surrounding those kind of situations than we have now. Did I even answer the question?
I think so. It was a good response, because it definitely
Okay.
I'll copy Chris. I agree with what you just said, Darren. And Mike.
Well played, sir. Well played.
Yeah.
I think there's a big difference with, like, if you had grown up on the same farm, same family farm for it's been your families for 100, 200 years, whatever, generations. That knowledge is passed down through the family. So even if you just grew up in that area and you stayed in that one area, uh, you would be not only familiar with what has happened through your lifetime, but what happens through your parents' lifetime, your grandparents, their grandparents. Like all that knowledge is just compounded and just saved in the family. I think that in our society today, where like people go to the cities, that whole knowledge base is kind of lost. Stories around the campfires, like verbal history just passed down, that's pretty lost. You know what I mean? So yeah, you can look in the Farmer's Almanac. You can see, what the weather's been like in your area, but like unless we had looked and seen that like where we lived is actually kind of technically a ghost town because it was burnt down like what 80 years ago, 100 years ago. Yeah, yeah, 100 some years ago. But like so we know, yeah, we've got to build like fire breaks. We got to like all of that. Hopefully we can insulate them from that. But
Frozen.
Oh, the tree
Uh-oh.
didn't actually blow down, and that was blocking the satellite.
See, there's still a couple. But yeah, that I think that's where if you're living out on a farm or a homestead, that's where your knowledge base comes in. Because you gotta really communicate with your neighbors, network out and find out. Because even if you hit the history books, old weather patterns and things like that for your area, you still may not hear about those random events like, oh, so and so, there's this beach way down here and people like to go down there and party. So every now and then we have to go back there and check things out because fires start there or whatnot. You never know. So that's, I think, the biggest difference between then and now is that knowledge base is lost unless you really get out there and network.
I think that's true. It's like one of those like, Grandma, why is that like that? Well, when I was your age, this river flooded, and that's why we did that. So
Mhm.
it's like that kind of stories that are passed down. And
I
Yeah,
think that the people tend to adapt to whatever is happening. And if you guys have another storm like that next year, people are going to start to realize that, hey, like it can be dangerous. And in the future, they're going to get ready. If we go down St. John area in New Brunswick, they have floodings every year. So by now, they're ready. Like, I mean, you can only be so much ready, but they have those bags of dirt or whatever they put around their property to make sure that the water doesn't come in. If you go, for example, in Alaska, everyone carries a gun because they know they can face a grizzly bear every time they go in the woods. Those tiny little things are so different from one place to another, but yet they're anchored in the people's way of life. Around here, we don't get much, dramatic events, but if it starts happening, people are going to get ready pretty fast. If you just think about what happened again in the Cagaquet area where they were without power for 3 weeks, they all have generators now. They're ready. I mean, maybe some of them sold them because, well, we only needed it once. We're not going to use it again. But I'm pretty sure most of the people still have it in their garage. Like you learn from the previous not mistakes, but from the previous things that happened. And I think that yes, in the past they were maybe more ready because, like Chris said, it was more common. Things were coming back and over again. But as things change, people will change their way of doing things as well. So I think we're going to get there eventually.
yeah,
you
not
know,
only change, but the families don't stay at the same place very long now.
Yeah.
Very few people live where they grew up. So
Yeah, that's very, very true.
yeah,
So even though we've acknowledged the elephant in the room, and I did see Annie mention it too about the lost knowledge. The generational gap that's happened, it's almost exacerbated because of the fact that people move away. So you move from Ontario to Arizona, well, you've got to learn a whole new set of how things are, for lack of a better way to put it. Yeah.
Stupid gardening zones. Ah,
You know what? Touch on something Darren had said. You know, I've heard so many different stories about how, you know, somebody's grandson or great grandson finally asks, "Hey, why do we do it this way?" And they're like, "I don't know. We've just always done it." And if you go back through the family stories, that we finally learn, oh, you know, there was this one problem this one year, and we started doing it that way to, like, you know, not, you know, to
prevent.
insulate against that problem. And ever since, nobody just talked about it. We just did it that way, and so that's the way it's taught years and generations down the line. Sometimes it's even forgotten. So,
sometimes good, sometimes bad.
yeah.
Could be either or.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I wanted to touch on just briefly, like totally off this topic, but still kind of on our topics in general, is I was driving around Ontario for 2 weeks with work, and I was in subdivisions, going through cities, um, out in the country. Like I went through Markham, little towns like Trenton, Brighton, um, was out in Clinton, Ontario, like St. Thomas, London, uh, Powassan, North Bay, Ottawa. And it was crazy because as I was driving, I noticed such a huge lack of gardens. So many people had nice green lawns, or there were these places where, further out in the country, you had like an acre or 2 acres and there was no trees, just grass, and they were cutting the grass. And I'm like, "W- why didn't you plant a fruit tree? Why didn't you?" And I talked to a number of people about it as well that I knew in the areas. And some of the reasons for not doing gardens or growing their own food and that sort of thing was time. They didn't have time to do it. Energy. They really couldn't be bothered in some cases. Or they were too tired from doing other stuff. A lot sometimes they said it was too shaded, so they had other mature trees growing up around the area, so the only thing they think they can grow is grass. Or they didn't want to change the look of, it's too nice. We've got, say a Japanese maple or another big maple, or those shrubs are really nice, so we just keep them. What have you have you guys seen any changes? Like, I want to say here, when I drive around, I've seen more chicken coops, more gardens, but when I drove through Ontario, it was kind of like, oh wow, I'm not seeing any of that. Like,
In my area, I see a lot more people doing, even if it's just a little bit of gardening. Like I have a couple of family members that at least they have raised beds. It's not much. They don't have like a dozen raised beds, but they have the one that they at least start growing stuff in. I hear a lot more people talking about getting chickens in a village where it's not allowed, but they don't care. They're gonna get the chickens anyway. Like it's it's not only about the eggs. It's just everything that the animals can do for you, and the compost, the manure, the compost, everything for your garden. So a lot of people now, I drive around, and I don't know if maybe it's because I notice more than I did before, but I see it at least like once every second house. People have a garden now, or at least like apple trees or something like that growing in their yard. Like an apple tree, it's not something that requires a lot of time. You plant it there. If you don't touch it, it's going to grow by its own on its own. You're going to get apples at some point. If you don't want to eat them, if you don't have time, let it go. So what? Like next year, you have 5 minutes, harvest five minutes of apples, and you'll have, apples for a month at least. You know,
Mhm. I'm, you know, I didn't see hardly any gardens when I was down in Oshawa, down in the city. And I remember specifically that Angie got into this and she wanted to, start gardening. She wanted to start prepping and stuff just to see if we could do it. And she actually changed the mindset for many different people at her work. She'd bring in like extra produce and stuff that she'd grown in her garden. And she changed people's minds and started getting, I think, 5, 6 different people at work started growing gardens just because she was, bringing stuff in and saying, "Hey, look what I grew!" And so they went home and started growing gardens themselves. So, I don't think enough people have been connected to their food stores. They're still very disconnected. But all I can say is, you just try and spread the good word about, hey, you should kind of like make sure you're insulated a little bit, even if it's just a little bit. It's like having a first aid kit around in case something happens. So that's all you can do.
I'm going to have a kind of two-part answer to this. So part one, in the last, I'm going to say the last 3 years, we've definitely noticed a difference
Okay, good.
in our area. But I will say, when you're talking about Ontario as a whole, because I have driven around a bit too, it does depend where you are. And I don't think it's necessarily a city versus country thing. I think there's other demographic reasons for it that I don't have the data to correlate it to anything. But you do see some areas where you have urban gardens and people gardening their whole front lawn and whatnot on very, very small properties in shade, this, that, and whatever. And some other places where it's like you have the ideal situation for a huge garden, and they're not doing, and everybody in the area doesn't do it. So I think there's some social stuff to it. I've seen it come up quite a bit in the chat too about the disconnect. And I'm going to link this back to what we were talking about power, because I think Remy talked about it last with the generators, right? And going back to the ice storm of '98, everybody went out and bought generators after that. But a lot of people did sell them later because guess what? I didn't need it again. But that incident immediately impacted them, immediately affected their lives for, in some cases, up to 3 or 4 weeks. No different than what's happening right now. It came through, and for some people, this event that just happened this week, that's an immediate impact, right? And so an immediate impact really resonates with people, and I think they will change. Because I say this about homesteading in the umbrella, and all the things that go along with it. I've been doing it long enough to see little ups and downs, and more people do it, and lots of people get out of it, and then it does this wave pattern over time. And I think when it comes to the food in the gardens, nobody's had that immediate impact yet.
True.
Most of us have been very insulated from it because there's always a safety net. And it's only really recently that we're actually starting to see prices creep up. And I
It's
think
like the
most of
boiling
us-
pot of water. It's gradual instead of.
It's been very slow, very slow. Some people have seen it, some people have talked about it. It's sort of done this little bit of a curve, but now 2 years into all the events that have just transpired, we're now getting to the top of the curve.
Oh, the
where,
hockey stick.
yeah, it's starting to climb a little bit more, but it's still different than the ice storm, because that
Yeah.
ice storm, you go from having power to the next minute, it's gone, and it's gone for 4 weeks. Whereas the food thing, it's like, well, if you didn't track it over the last 2 years, you might not have seen that peanut butter has been going up by 10. This is not real. I'm using this as a fictitious example just to clarify, but that peanut butter's gone up every week by 2 cents.
Basically has.
Over the course of 2 years, that's significant, but you don't see it exactly like the frog in the boiling pot of water. If you put it right in the boiling pot, it hops out. I forget the experiment that relates to, but if you put the frog in cold water and turn the temperature up slowly, you just kill the frog. It doesn't move.
Right.
It actually likes the warmth. So I think when it comes to the gardens, the chickens, the the food self-sufficiency. It's kind of like what Mike said, realizing how much food it actually takes to feed a human, because I think most of us have no clue.
Exactly.
Number one, and we've always had the safety net. So I think you said it you said it a couple times, Darren. Like, and I'm not saying this in a bad way because it is good, but
You're always picking on me.
I am, but I'm picking on you in a good way. But when you started growing vegetables, you said you kind of did a whole lot of stuff, and a whole lot of effort, but then you kind of got through the season. It's like, but I have very little to show. Not nothing, but very little to show for it. But
Exactly.
you kept going, right? And I think growing food, gardening, feeding yourself, getting that self-sufficiency back, it doesn't happen overnight. It's exactly like the boiling pot. You have to start and slowly turn up the heat over time to get to the point that you actually make a significant difference. So I think there's a lot of stuff going on there as to why. And I did see it come up too, and I kind of lost the chat for a minute because I went on a tirade. But I did see the point too. There are some people that have legitimate reasons why they can't. Right. So I think that's where it's hard when you're driving in the countryside. It's hard because you don't know everybody's story. So
Very
you
true.
do have some people that maybe they look like they've got the most ideal situation. It's like you own 5 acres, you could have chickens, you could do this, that, whatever. Time is a legitimate factor, constraint, but I also think time is thrown around as a pseudo constraint, because that's just, to some people that is an excuse, but to other people it's a reality. Some people really don't have time, and other people couldn't be bothered to spend the time. And
Yeah, because they're gonna tell you they don't have time to care for chickens, which takes 15 minutes a day. But they'll spend 2 hours on their phone, going up and down, and
But you could also find that single mom with 3 kids, you know what I mean, that was working 2 jobs trying to make ends meet. And I grew up in situations like that, so like I understand that you never know everybody's story.
Yeah.
There's always a reason. Now, I see your point that like if you want it bad enough, you'll find a way. If not, you'll find an excuse. So I'm familiar with both sides of that coin, but like there's legitimate reasons sometimes where you can't. Like, there are people out there that are really struggling.
Mhm. Well, and this is the thing too, and I'm going to say it, and I've talked about this for a long time, but we've talked about this on videos that on one side of the fence, it's never too late to start growing food, because anything you grow is a help. It takes some of the stress off the system, gives you a bit of self-security back. It doesn't matter if it's one tomato plant or what it is, but at the same time, when you start putting in higher economic pressures, rent, taxes, price of food, all of those sort of things, it does leave some people in a situation where money is a resource that takes the place of other resources. And when you don't have the money, although there are ways to do things on the cheap, you may not get there as fast as you'd like. So you may be constrained. All you can do is grow one tomato or one tomato plant, as opposed to what you'd really like to do of, cutting your feed bill in half. Are we past that point of no return? I certainly hope not. But if 50% of the population isn't actively engaged in growing and able to propagate those things to share with others, then you're only getting it from a source where you're going to have to exchange money to get it. Maybe we could be too late. It's for some things. There's the doom.
Yeah.
I got disconnected again.
So there was another conversation I had too with someone. I'm thinking whether I should name them or not to kind of put the whole thing in context. I'll try not to. See if the whole story works. So I was talking to them about, everything going on and regulations that have prevented us in Canada from doing kind of the things that we'd like to do. For example, if we if we raised an extra pig or raised some extra rabbits or chickens or that sort of thing, being able to sell that meat to friends, to neighbors, that sort of thing. And the person said, well, no, I wouldn't buy meat from someone like that because, I prefer the government to be able to regulate and inspect and make sure it's done properly. And then I'm kind of guaranteed that it's all good. And I said, okay, well, you kind of have a relative that has a dairy farm. How do you feel about not being able to buy milk from their dairy farm? Oh, well, that's different. We know them. Okay. Well, what if you actually knew the people you were buying your meat from every year? You built up a relationship and you did that. And it kind of got me into the whole, like, you know, right now, we just got an email from Amazon, as well as I saw someone posted on Facebook where there's a recall on Jif peanut butter. So I've got 3 jars of Jif peanut butter that have just been recalled because of salmonella. We've all heard of the lettuce that's been recalled because of salmonella. And I went on the Canadian
July.
website and it was like, wow, the recalls on food are amazing. You go through the list and there's candy, like very popular candy that have been recalled because of metal shards. There's other stuff that they added milk when there shouldn't be milk in it. They've got nuts in them when it was nut-free product. It's like, to me, looking at all of that and having the government say, this is regulated, this is okay, versus not allowing homesteaders, farmers to sell their product from their farm it kind of baffles my mind. And it was one of those conversations that, I was getting a
Take it a
little.
step.
Uh-oh, tree's back.
Oh no,
Listening.
you need another storm to take that one tree down.
And I'm back. Stop. Take it a step further and look at how the government has said it's okay to have X amount of rat poop in this or X amount of, bugs in this. And you start to realize, like, you're taking like the bare minimum. And as somebody who's worked for the government, brought to you by the lowest bidder, I'm just saying, like, if you hit that community where you hit those local food sources, the farmers, the beef farmers, the dairy farmers, things like that, you'll get a better quality product for just about the same amount of money, if not maybe a little bit more. But isn't quality worth it in a lot of areas? Or would you rather have, like, X amount of, like, bugs in your coffee? Which I still can't get over with, and I drink coffee, but whatever.
I think it's a gradual thing. It's still the frog in the boiling water, because it's all sort of transpired. You can unravel it, but it's all transpired with promise, right? Because I'm actually going to go to Sean in Alaska had a good point about $1 a day or $1 a week would still equal you, $365 or $52, depending how you look at it. So my point about, maybe people don't have the ability. If you put $1 away, that'll buy a lot of seeds, for example. So there are ways to figure it out, but that also illustrates the point that still takes time and it still takes effort. And so the promise that has not been given to us by any one entity or any one person or anything like that. It's been a gradual thing over time. But the promise is an easier life, because growing your own food takes time. It takes energy. It takes effort. You're battling insects, diseases, pests, other things that are coming to take your crop, whether it's plants or animals. dealing with those plants and animals to get them to produce what you need to, etc. And the promise is you will have an easier life if somebody else takes care of it, which then has to be centralized. It's no different than power. We were actually talking about this today in a work context of how these storms bring up some interesting questions. For example, could our power distribution is a really good metaphor for the food distribution, because it's sort of the same thing, right? Distributing power just is a little simpler because there's less moving parts, for lack of a better way to put it, because you just have to create the energy and get it from point A to point B. Well, the big problem, there is problems with creating the energy, but there's also huge problems with getting the energy from point A to point B. And in Canada, most of it is aerial wires. Well, if you have windstorms and tree blowdown and all those sort of things, you can sort of see the dilemma. Going back to the fire break, you need a massive fleet of humans to maintain that, because they have to maintain a right of way clear of trees so that you don't get that. Well, we haven't put collectively, the resources haven't been put into maintaining that. So now the question is, well, do we start moving things underground? But that still is, it's like a spider web going from a central point out into the world. Would you potentially be better, the same as the food system, to decentralize it and have a whole lot of, I'm going to pick on solar for a moment, and take out some of the other issues of, you still have to create the solar panel and there's waste at the end of that solar panel's life. But would thousands of little microfits on thousands of and millions of different properties across the world be better than solar farms? Because the impact is spread out. The network, and I know there's issues with grid tie-in and whatnot, which I'm not an expert on, but you still are building a more resilient system, because if it goes out in one area, it may be more local, which we've just sort of confirmed at the local level, it can actually be handled better than at a huge scale where you suddenly, which is the same as the food, right? At a local level where using the rabbit example, where if there's 4 of us and one of us raises rabbits and we all are neighbors and we basically know exactly how that one person raises rabbits, then you know where it came from. You've probably seen it, which I know at scale causes other problems because of biosecurity or whatever. But if it's just the 4 of us, maybe there isn't as much risk. You also don't have the scale of processing, which is what causes the contamination and why they have to have allowances for things in certain food items like peanut butter, because if you grow peanuts, you're going to get some peanuts that come out of the ground with diseases and insects and this, that, and whatever. And when you suddenly are trucking around dump trucks full of peanuts, you can't screen them all. So you have to have an allowance. So scale can be good in some ways and horrible in others. And I think what we're starting to see, the promise has been the scale will always be better. And now we're starting to like you say, the pass down, where sometimes you forget at the beginning why somebody even started doing it. But then you get to the end and you go, well, maybe it was a great idea. So maybe some things at scale are better, but maybe some things at scale aren't better. And I think that's the hard part with this, because going back to the doom, and I know the question came up about what the doom was. The doom is the negative. The doom is the impending, overhanging, overshadowing thing that just feels like the world is trying to squash you at every possible corner. But maybe there is some light in some of the things done at scale, and other places where we should just collectively as humans be going, why are we doing this way? And I think that's where it gets super complicated, and why I use the energy example, because not as many moving parts. It takes a lot of variety to feed a human.
And I like that you said it's kind of on a gradual scale. One of the things I hate getting in discussions with some people where it's one extreme or the other. And I think there's, we can't do that. We have to get into little details and take it gradually by different steps. I think in that way we'll all have a better understanding, or better be able to deal with all these situations and make things better.
Mm-hmm. This is, I'm going to go back to a comment that I did see come up too. There were several people. I can't remember who all you were, so I apologize. But we're talking about learning through YouTube. And we're on YouTube right now. We're talking about some of this stuff. We're sharing, the whole point of this roundtable is to take a topic, discuss it, get different points of view, because we all have different points of view. We're all at different points in our homestead journey. We do different things. We have different ways of doing it. But it's interesting. And this is where I think, what we portray, not even portray, what we show, because we're just show what we do. There's no portrayal. It's just, this is what we're doing. Is kind of at a deep end, right? So somebody would watch some of the stuff we're going and go, oh my God, why would I have that? I don't need that many chickens. I don't need that many tomato plants. What are you guys doing? I'm never going to be able to do that. And if you take it into the bite-sized steps and you look at the narrative that comes along with it, and when we all have it, right? Because we're all at different points. You can't jump. You can, but it's very hard to jump into growing 150 tomato plants in year one, growing them all successfully, and turning them all into usable food if you've never canned and you've never done that sort of stuff. That isn't a monumental undertaking that most people shouldn't ever expect themselves to do. But if you take it as, this is where we all should be, and I'm picking on tomatoes because they can produce you a lot of food. If this is where we maybe all should be, maybe I can see how to get there and take it into more bite-sized bits. But I think sometimes showing the reality turns people off of it too, because it is a lot of work. Hopefully,
I always come back to, like, in my experiences, everybody gets not lazy but complacent. So we've been brought up in a society where the government says, "Oh, we'll provide for you. We'll provide for you. You can always go to the grocery store. You can always go to the gas station. You can always do this." And so we've had the luxury. Not all of us have had the luxury of growing up in an area or in a family setting where somebody grows gardens, or where we had a family farm. So you don't really have that connection, and you just say, well, this is just how it's done. This is how you should do it. And the government is looking out for us, so they have the best interest at heart. And like, that's how I used to be. And then I went and was in the military, and I realized the government doesn't care about me. And I'm not saying that in general. I'm just saying that, like, that's my experience so far. When I was in the government and working for the government, I was just a number. I was just a product, in a cog in the system. And so I learned very quickly, like, you have to kind of insulate yourself, watch out for yourself, and try and take care of as many of those close to you as you can. And I mean, you can even point it out, is like Flint, Michigan still doesn't have clean water. And it's been years. There's no excuse for that. Government should have taken care of that. That should have been handled. No. And in the end, it was just a $2,000 decision. That's all they saved a year, is $2,000. And they switched the water source, and it rotted out the pipes because it was so acidic. It's just one of those things where it proves to me again and again how humans are nothing more than just cogs in the wheel. We're just part of the system there to generate, money for that 1%. And that's how I feel about most of it in life. I know I went down doom.
You went full on doom.
I went full on. I was prepped and ready for it.
That's why I always say it's more about entities, because I think I said it earlier. I think most humans, most people, we want the same things. We want to live comfortably. We want to be happy.
Yeah.
There's different ways of getting to that, and there's always bad apples. I'm just going to say that up front. But the vast majority of us, like 99% of us, are the same. But like you say, it's the cog in the wheel, right? Because it's no different than chickens. Chickens are an example I think people can understand. An industrial chicken farm doesn't care about the individual at all. Whereas you might see the value of an individual on your homestead for whatever it brings. But when you have millions of them in a barn, you can't go down to the individual level. And I don't. This is where I have a hard time with doom, because I don't think I don't think anyone's out to get us. It's just an unfortunate. It's an unfortunate mathematical paradigm that we're stuck in.
Now I
And
agree with that 100%.
the only way to break it is to take what control you can over the things that you do, i.e., if you can control growing your food, propagating your food so that you aren't reliant on systems to either buy that food item or buy the seeds or buy the animals or whatever, and eventually even figure out the feed for it. If you can figure out all those parts, then you've just taken yourself as one of those cogs out of that system. And if you start multiplying that by all the various things you could do in a homesteading lifestyle, you can suddenly take a whole lot of cogs out of the wheel. And if everybody takes a whole lot of cogs out of the wheel, then the mathematical system and the equations that have us stuck in this no longer work. It's not a case that anybody's.
No, I
trying.
agree. I don't think any one like 3-letter word or company, you know what I mean, is like listening in and honing in just on at each person. I don't believe that. I believe that, you know what, yeah, devices listening in, but it's because they're trying to collect the data on us so that way they can get our money and gear, the sales pitch to us more directed to get us to buy more in, to make us more into consumerism. And I understand, like, it's the same thing as buying power. Like, if a million of us stopped buying from one company, they'd be forced to listen.
Those
Because
damn
that's
seed companies.
but it's again complacency. It all falls back into complacency. We as humans just kind of like our status quo, man.
It is a double-edged sword, though, because what you just said about seed companies in a generic sense, but it was a good point, because it's all about scale and centralization. That's the mathematical equation that we're stuck in, because I'm going to, somebody may correct me on this or may have a different opinion, but I'm going to pick on dairy. We're not producing a substantially larger volume of dairy products, but what we're doing is consolidating the number of dairy farms.
Yeah.
That shows growth mathematically, but it's not really growth, because you can only grow so much, because you only have so much land and resources to feed cows. You can only squeeze so much out because you are a bit finite. Not the best example, but that's kind of that's the thing, right? It's almost like it's like mathematical keeping up with the Joneses in a way.
Awesome. Well, I think we're going to call it at that, unless anyone has any further ideas, thoughts, impending doom.
We haven't had it yet. Squash.
You're right. We went like an entire.
No, I was waiting. I saw the whole
squash.
doom list, the whole nines. I was waiting for like, squash,
Yeah,
man.
there was a lot of doom, but not too much squash talk.
That's impossible.
Way to go, Chris. Holding strong, brother.
Well, I redirected it to tomatoes tonight, because
fair enough.
That's just the cogs in the wheel. Squash may be a powerhouse, but squash can't get all the credit all the time, because the dilemma: if you had to eat nothing but squash every day of your life, you might not enjoy that. So, squash may be an easy cog to take control over, but there's others. There's always others.
All right, guys. Everyone have a good night. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you got a little information out of this, and we'll see you at the next roundtable.
Night,
Take
guys.
care.
Okay, guys. Thank you, everyone.